Welcome to the podcast, my good friend Phil Owens. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
I'm excited to be here.
I used to introduce it Defiant Spirit podcast, Man Uprising podcast, and you know what? I figured who needs labels,
Just
right?
podcasts,
Just
right?
podcast with my good friend, and that's enough.
Yeah.
That's all we do is we talk, and I know that there's a lot I want to talk with you about. But maybe everybody's sick of hearing my voice. Maybe they get to hear your beautiful voice and tell us a little bit about your life's journey.
Oh, where to start? I grew up in Oklahoma. My parents had 9 kids, so I was the third oldest. Born on my mother's 21st birthday. So by the time she was 21, she had 3 kids. Um, and joined the military right out of high school.
You know you were going to do that?
No, I knew I didn't want to be in Oklahoma as I grew up. So
Come
it
from
just
Nebraska. You're not going to get
yeah.
any argument.
So it was like the most logical way to get out. Um, I often joke once I found out there wasn't a fence around the place, then I knew I wanted to get out. So I went in the military. I spent some time in the military and then moved to Colorado. Um, and I've been here since. So I moved here, I think in 93, I think it was. Um, was in EO, YPO, ran several businesses, and now I'm here, part of Man Up and uh, embracing the second stage or second mountain of life. And yeah, trying to.
Do you ever read anything by Carlos Castaneda?
No, but the name sounds really
It's
familiar.
like kind of one of the early pioneers in psychedelic shamanism. He wrote a lot of fictional books that I don't know became sort of cult classics. But anyways, he talks a lot about that we all have a personal story that we carry around, and it's fiction because it's no longer here. And when I think of you, it's interesting because I didn't know you through any of that. We just met a couple of years ago in a very distinct and different chapter of your life, and it was in a very different context than our men's group. That was a precursor for those listening to Man, what is now Man Uprising. So when you talk about all those things, and obviously you glossed over them, but I know you from this mountain, not that mountain. It's
Yeah,
interesting to me to hear you tell your story.
yeah. Um, yeah, and that story piece, like I learned along this journey to let go of that story. And I think of those like those identification or that story as just like tools that we use along the journey of, becoming like as an entrepreneur. And that didn't learn to not identify with that. Like an entrepreneur is not who I truly am. That was just something I was doing in that phase of my life.
This is more in retrospect. You can say,
Yes.
now
Yeah.
imagine when you were the entrepreneur, I am an entrepreneur.
100%. That's when I would introduce myself, I would lead with that. Like people would say, well, what do you do? Or, who are you? I'm an entrepreneur. Like, yeah, it becomes so much of our identity.
Yeah, this book that I'm working on, which was in kind of is the curriculum in Man Uprising, is a guy that walks into a bar and he gets asked these fundamental questions. What's your name? And he tells them his name as if like we have just one name, we have lots of names. And then the second question a man always gets asked or asks another man is, what do you do?
Yeah.
Right? And invariably he responds, I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor. It's like, that's it? That's
Yeah.
what you do? And that's how you get paid.
Yeah.
It becomes our identity.
Yeah. Even with the name piece at some point. Well, I mean, my name, Philip, is my given name. It's kind of biblical. And I went through this phase of my life where I was, uh, I my parents were in what I would call a religious cult, and so I kind of didn't want to be associated with that at all. So that's one of the reasons I go by Phil, and then I would even say like, people call me or I'm known as more than my name is Phil. That's like who I am.
And that's just on the name tag, right?
Right.
And you're a dad, so to your daughter, you're dad.
Yeah.
That's a name,
Yeah.
right? No, like
And,
thousands of names.
and now a grandpa.
Grandpa.
Yeah.
Right? Is that what they call you, Grandpa?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's beautiful. So it's amazing to watch a man go on such a definitive journey. Like I can just see the first mountain and the second mountain are distinctly different.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear, more about that, but especially, your climb of this second mountain, as you called it.
I think I would say that the second climb started about 5 years ago. Um, my father had passed away. Um, my business partner and I, who I'd been doing business with for 20 plus years, or that relationship was souring. Um, or we were no longer seeing eye to eye, I guess I would say. It wasn't like, in EO and YPO, would always hear about these like partnerships that flame out and crash and burn. This was more of a, like relationships do. We were kind of starting to see things differently and we weren't really well aligned. So that was happening. I'd been in the roofing industry my whole life. I got in it because my dad had a roofing business growing up. And, in hindsight, I realized that I was really trying to impress my dad and show him that I could do it bigger and better. And, then maybe he would love me and accept me. And he had passed away. So that was over. Like where that was at that point was the end. Right. And I'd gone through a divorce and I kind of hit a low spot. Not kind of, I hit a low spot. And I'd worked with plant medicines when I got out of the military through some divine intervention or guidance. And I went back to that. And that's where I started the climb to up the second mountain, if you will. And I wanted to help other vets. And I have a amazing psychotherapist that I've been working with for 15, 20 years, Randy Waldman. And she suggested at one point that maybe somebody who was coming out of prison wasn't unlike somebody coming out of the military. And one of my bigger challenges at that point was reintegration, like to reintegrate into society after that experience. And so I kind of, she suggested that. And so that's where I started. And I've just kind of progressed down that. And it's been not only a, a, a climb up that second side, but it's been very spiritual. And I've really re-embraced the spiritual aspects of life. Um, uh, I've learned how important community is. I've been in EO and YPO and in forums in both of those and learned the power of a forum, especially in a business world. And now I'm learning that being part of a community is just as powerful, if not more so, in the spiritual and emotional evolution on this second hill.
So much there, so good. I'll start with this, but I don't want to go down this path. But EO, for those listening, is Entrepreneurs Organization, and YPO is Young Presidents Organization.
Yes.
And those are business networking communities. I mean, massive communities around the world. It's interesting though, right? What are they built around? What do you do?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah.
I am a fill in the blank. And all of the guys in Man Uprising in our early iteration, our first peer group that you were part of, came from EO or YPO, except me. I was the outsider. I came from a very different place. But I saw all of you saying the same thing. I love the peer group aspect of it. They call it forum. But I've outgrown the question, what do you do?
Yeah.
So can we have a peer group based on something deeper, which is all the things you just talked about?
Yeah. And it's really, and that's from what do you do to what is your purpose? Like I think that first mountain was like, what do you do? Can you accomplish these things, primarily materialistic things or capitalistic things? And the second, right, for me has been like, who am I? What's my purpose? Why am I here? Um, and so, yeah, that's, and yeah, they're very, EOYPO, very business focused. And what maybe even you don't know is like, again, it came out of tragedy. There was, the story that I remember is, YPO, a guy, took his life after being his father had passed away and he was running a multi-billion-dollar corporation, if I remember right, maybe in Dallas, Texas, or Houston, Texas, or something. He's 35 years old, and it was very lonely for him running that business. And his, I think it was his mother and his sister maybe that started YPO to try to have people who were in that phase of life to have a community where they could connect and relate with each other.
I didn't know that backstory.
Yeah, I'm not certain that's where I've never researched it, but someone had told me that story as I was getting into YPO, and it resonated with me. So
back in my rabbi's days, I was told by another rabbi, he said, everything I say is true. Some of it actually happened.
yeah, it's true for him, right?
I don't care if the facts are true, it's truth.
Yeah.
Because I know so many guys who that is true for. I've gone through that period of, and I've done podcasts on this. This is my primary, really harsh question in life. And I shared it with you before, but I asked men, why haven't you killed yourself? Because the only thing I know about a man walking through the door is he's here and he's chosen to be here. There must be a why, right? And you went back to a very dark place. Obviously, you found your why. I'd love to hear more about what that means to you.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll say that like, um, coming out of the military, specifically, this idea of like reaching that point is is has a stigma to it. It's this weakness. It's this, uh, you know, it, it just has a stigma to it. And I'll get a little emotional here, but I've been there twice in my life. Um, I've had that suicidal ideation at 2 points in my life. Both times have been very transformative, right? Um, but we, especially I think as men growing up in the Western world, we don't talk about that enough. But yet most of us experience it at some point in our life, at least this thought.
Most of us experience it, and then the rest who don't just aren't admitting it.
Yeah.
Everybody experiences it at some level. Doesn't mean you plan it out.
Or maybe it's not even you, maybe it's your buddy or your, uh, somebody 3 times removed, but it impacts all of us, and some of us more than others, I suppose. But I think it's important to talk about that because I feel like those were two very pivotal, transformative times in my life. Um, and the first time was after getting out of the military, and the second time was, what I would say at the bottom of the first mountain, looking up the second mountain, trying to figure out, do I want to climb that mountain? Do I have do I have the elan vital within me to climb yet another mountain? And what does that mountain look like? And I remember a time talking to my therapist, Randy, that I mentioned before, where I was telling her, I feel like, I grew up on this island where everything I'd ever known existed on this island. And I had this feeling that there was more out there. There was something else out there. And one day I found a raft and I climbed on the raft and I paddled out in the middle of the ocean. And now I'm in the middle of the ocean and I can't go back to where I came from. And I don't really know what the second mountain or what's out there, but do I really want to pursue that? And at that point, like I was already in the middle of the ocean now, so I had no choice but to pursue it. And thank God I did. But
Well, I'd argue you did have a choice and you chose to pursue it.
yeah,
So why? Like, what was, if you go back, if it's okay to explore this, I don't want to take you
yeah,
anywhere you're not comfortable with. But I'd love to know more because there are people watching, there are men watching who probably are grappling with what's my why. So,
um, yeah. Why did I do it? I think that within us all, and I've referred to it at least once, is this uh, Elan Vital is I think it's a French word. It's the innate drive to rise time and time again, regardless of the number of times we might fall down. And it's in all life on this planet has Elan Vital. And I I just knew there was more out there. And you know, I don't think we've specifically talked about this before, but Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, was a big part of it. Um, I was a very voracious. I've read tons and tons of books for a while. I read that one, and then I'll mess up her name, and I know you know it, but The Choice
eager.
by Edith Eger. And both of those were very powerful books for me. And so I wanted to figure out what's my purpose? Why did I come here? Why am I here? And, through this journey, I've realized that my purpose to be here is to be part of a community and um, to help others find their why and to lead people along the path. I often refer to it as like, I'm just going to walk beside you and shine the flashlight on your path so that you can walk your path and you can find your way. There's a old saying I learned in EO, I think is where I first heard it about pushing your own boulder. Like, I'm not going to try to push your boulder up the hill for you. I'm not going to try to carry your bags for you. I'm just going to walk beside you and encourage you and shine the light so you can find the path. And that path has been plant medicines have been a big part of that path for me.
I want to explore that. Can I share some of the things I love about you?
Yeah, please.
Um, one of the things I love is that you came from a world of incredible, not incredible, you would call it toxic masculinity, right? I would just call it not masculine because I don't think true masculinity can be toxic, just like toxic love isn't love. It's something
Yeah.
else. But we know what we're saying. And you commented on it before, but coming from not only the military, like you're holding back, you were deep in the military, like you were
Yeah.
all in. And you walked away from it. And then you were deep into an entrepreneur. Nobody gets to YPO just because they're an entrepreneur. Like you
Yeah.
climbed the ladder, you get to the top of this sort of machismo, everything that guys supposedly should accomplish in life, and you're tough and you're accomplished, and in some ways you walked away from it, right? And I know there are pieces there still and whatever, but I just think it's such a remarkable thing to see a man who chooses more and then starts defining more in a much deeper way. I just think it's such a beautiful thing. I talk to a lot of guys who maybe don't make it to the top of that mountain and then they go this path, but to have ascended and then chose to descend and walk another mountain is quite powerful.
Thanks. Yeah, what comes up for me um, is this idea of happiness or joy. And it, it can be as lonely at the top of that mountain as any place else. Like it doesn't bring us to true happiness and joy. And so that climbing that mountain was really about, my father had a roofing business and I got into the roofing business and I was trying to earn my father's love and an appreciation and acceptance. And so it really comes down to the why behind why I was doing it. I was doing it for reasons that weren't true to my nature. And so it didn't really bring me joy. And this second mountain is about what brings me joy. And then to go back to this masculinity, toxic masculinity, this probably part of that podcast where people are stop listening, maybe, but it's kind of controversial because we grow up in. I know the Western world. I hear about other parts, but I grew up here in the Western world in the United States, and it's we're taught that, at least I was taught that everything is a competition. Like we as two boys growing up in America, we're going to compete for the girl. We're going to compete for the job. We're going to compete for everything. So it's this idea of scarcity, and it creates this environment of like one-upsmanship and dominance, and feeds into this idea of patriarchy where like that we feel like we need to compete and own these things. And and quite honestly, I mean, you and I have talked a little bit about, I grew up in I referenced that religious cult, if you will, that I grew up in. And that was very much that, like the women were to be subservient to their husbands. And so I grew up with that. And, somewhere along the way, I realized that we're all in this together. You and I together, and our friends and our loved ones, male, female, doesn't matter. We're all in this together. And that was a part of climbing the second mountain, was a really challenging part to try to find that um, razor's edge between being masculine but not being toxic, and being feminine but not being too far on that side. And it was hard to try to find that. There's not a lot of resources out there.
And
um
and my experience is that the rejection of a thing isn't the antidote to it. It's the redemption of the thing.
yeah,
So, for instance, patriarchy isn't bad. It depends how and why and when and where. Right? Without patriarchy, there's no construction. There's no evolution of enterprise and
yeah,
business and commerce. But run amok, right? Unfettered without the feminine, it becomes this toxic thing. Because, the flip side of it is toxic femininity, which is also a problem, right? It can be
yeah,
too much of this sort of spinning without evolution. We need the synthesis of these two beautiful energies as opposed to the rejection of either one.
yeah, I totally agree. And we talked a little bit, and we've talked a bit about enneagrams, and labels or something. That labels kind of play into that because um I've done some like thinking about labels, and we label things and we put them in boxes, and we say these are these things, right? And kind of enneagrams play into that. And I think I told you earlier, like recently I was thinking about that, and it reminded me I grew up helping my father work on trucks and equip his tools. And we had to learn to label things because I needed to know a 9/16